Welcome to Helping Organisations Thrive. Today I have Sarah Harvey. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks very much for having me, Julian.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Good to speak to you today. I'm just going to tell the audience a little bit about you. You are a leadership, culture, and conflict coach. Let's hope we don't have any conflict today.
No.
You are the author of a book called Savvy Conversations, and Savvy Conversations is all about creating places that are fun and energizing places to work, where relationships thrive and teams collaborate to achieve their goals. So we are going to have a savvy conversation, and you are known as Savvy Sarah, or Sarah Savvy Conversations, however you want to say it. So that's what we're going to do today. But before we get into that, I'd like to get to know a bit more about our guests. So I want to ask, what do you love about what you do?
Thanks, Julian. I think I've learned this over the last 18 years, really, which is a bit of a journey. But actually, what I've realised I love is each of those three things that you've mentioned. So I'd sort of highlight around sort of working with individual leaders is so rewarding to help them be the best they can be, and then seeing how they their approach, their self-awareness, when they work on that, how fabulous it is for them and their own teams. So it's a huge privilege, I think, to do that. And then what goes hand in hand with that is around culture, which we'll probably come on to a bit later, but helping people develop a culture in an organisation that's more positive. Of course, dealing with toxic cultures, but even if a culture is good, how can it become better? And I absolutely love being able to work with people on how they actually do that in a really practical way. And then I suppose finally it is around helping people in conflict. So, what's not to love about helping people resolve their conflicts and helping them move forward more positively? Yes, it's tricky, but I think it's just so rewarding to be able to help people have a framework to move forward when they've been in a difficult place. So, yeah, those are the three things, really.
That's great, and because in reality there is difficult conversations to have. There is challenging conversations to have, and I just want to get your thoughts on what you've, I guess, observed within your in terms of leadership over the last 18 months. Have you seen people have gone? Has it gone more toxic, less toxic? Has it gone more challenging conversations or less? I just want to get your thoughts in the interactions you've had with your clients.
That's so interesting because, in fact, I was reflecting on this the other day because I think it varies. And although that's a bit of a dull answer, that's the reality. So, on the one hand, some people really seem to have thrived over the last 18 months. They actually have put huge effort into communicating more effectively, because we're been more distanced in various ways, because we're using more technology. Some people have really thought about, how do we do that? How do we have the right conversations in the right way, and at the right time? And so they've really thrived and not loved the time, obviously, that would be wrong to say, but made the best of it and built some good relationships as a result of it. Others, unfortunately, have really struggled, and I think it is that what I observe is the lack of connection, the lack of real deep human connection that they've been able to achieve over the last 18 months. And of course, that's at the heart of what Savvy Conversations is all about. Is about how do we build those deep connections that are meaningful, in order that we can all thrive. And I think the reality is that it's been a difficult time for that, and some people have definitely found that a big challenge. There's some work to do, in the next period now to put some of that right.
Yeah, and I think my experience is probably similar, really. I think some organisations have taken the opportunity of this crisis and see what they could get out of it. And I heard a phrase from an Australian, make the best of a crisis. Make the most of what you can from it, which sounds quite weird, but actually it's quite positive. It's looking for
Mm.
the silver linings, the opportunities. And I've seen a lot of organizations grab hold of that, how they can sort of work and engage the sort of the employees. And there's been others that have not been so, I think, to be honest, they've just been kicked into survival and they've struggled to even get themselves sorted in a thrive mode. Now, I headlined you at Savvy Conversations, and that's what you're known for with your book as well. What is a savvy conversation? How would you describe a savvy conversation? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, for me, it's so important. The first part of the savvy conversation is about reframing the conversations that we have. So the whole reason why I chose to call them savvy was because I was getting quite fed up with people saying they've had to have some difficult conversations, challenging conversations. Oh, they're so crucial conversations. I'm not criticizing any of those particular words, but actually, if you think about it, it's framing us for a difficult time and a challenging time. And actually, what I wanted to do was to say, actually, we can make these conversations more positive. They don't need to be as difficult as often we're making them. So savvy for me in headline terms speaks to that. And then really on a more kind of granular level, it is about having the right conversation, having it in the right way and having it at the right time. And for me, those are the three things that we need to try and balance as leaders, especially. But any of us need to balance those three things, and often we don't get that balance right, and that's where a conversation and then therefore relationships can potentially be damaged. So yeah, focus on the right conversation in the right way at the right time.
I really like that reframing. I think that's really important. As you say, as soon as you say the word, it's going to be difficult, your whole psychological sense of things, oh, this is going to be hard, ready for a battle, ready for a fight. And actually just making it savvy means you got to have your wits about you, you got to think about it, you got to plan it and everything else, I think is a really helpful approach. And I think for me, that's just if people can just take that away right today, I just don't think about, oh, it's going to be a difficult conversation or a hard conversation. I'm just going to have a savvy conversation here.
Yeah,
and that means,
absolutely.
so if we're having those savvy conversations, and we will probably have them in various contexts and probably lots of remote contexts now. What's the best way of going that? You alluded to it in terms of how, the sort of right place, right time, and everything. So what are the things we need to think about in planning that? Because like anything in any conversation, there's got to be some sense of purpose and plan, isn't there? Rather than just, so what are your thoughts on that, and sort of what are your tips to make that conversation really fruitful, really positive, and really beneficial for that relationship?
Well, of course, sometimes we can plan for conversations, but sometimes we can't. So for those that we can plan for, then I'd really recommend kind of obviously giving some thought beforehand, and just thinking through what do you want to achieve from the conversation. That would be the first thing. And that sounds so obvious, but actually in my experience, people don't do that very often at all. They really don't. They, even if we take the framework of an organization and the fact that supervision sessions, one-to-ones are going to come up, appraisals are going to come up. Even so, we don't really plan for what we want to say. We might plan. We might plan in terms of filling out some paperwork, for instance, but we don't always plan for actually what do we want to say to this person? What's the key messages we want to get across? And how can we get those across in a way that's really helpful to them and to us? So I think we can absolutely plan conversations that we know that are going to come up. And by that, I don't mean that that's contrived and that we've already decided what we're going to say. It's more about planning our approach. So it's more about, for me, do I feel that I've prepared enough so that I can be as candid and honest as I want to be in this conversation? So, if there's some difficult stuff to happen, to be said, then have I planned enough to think, yes, I am able to be candid with this person, tell them exactly what they need I think they need to hear from me, but do it in a way that is obviously respectful to them and that engages them in that conversation. And so that the next part being making sure that we're not just talking at them, that we are actually engaging in a conversation, and it's a two-way thing. Because again, in some of my experience, that although that sounds obvious, it doesn't always happen. It's kind of I've been saving this up, and now I'm going to tell you what I think, rather than really asking lots of good questions. And I suppose really a coaching approach is what we're talking about to engage people.
And you say it's a conversation, isn't it? And a conversation is a dialogue, is a two-way. We have to listen, respond. We might have a plan, but it's a plan, isn't it? It's a broader approach or an approach. It's interesting. I talk to a lot of people about making sure you set your intent right, as in what you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to get out of this. Because people feel that if it's an intent that's purely basically selfish or just about, they'll just feel it in your body language, your words you'll say, it'll direct everything. And it's almost making sure you think actually that intent is not pure in that sense, but it's beneficial for both of you. I think it's that end game is almost like the outcome together is a win-win, I guess. I mean, coin a phrase.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's actually the first part of the kind of framework really that I developed is about that intent. So it's about making it safe for you to have whatever conversation you need to have. And part of that is absolutely fundamentally about setting your intentions. So we're definitely thinking along the same lines there.
So what are the things besides the approach, the intent, when we're going to have these savvy conversations? What else do we need to think about and you say sometimes it's, how do you handle those not so planned conversations as well? So some thoughts on that.
So I think that's why I like the approach of knowing what your approach is going to be rather than knowing what you exactly want to say. So as well as I think in being engaging is really key, because there's absolutely no point in having the conversation unless the other person is engaged in it, no matter what you're talking about. But also, I think to add to what I've already kind of mentioned, I think sometimes we lose our direction a bit. So sometimes we kind of have conversations and it seems like we've got some outcomes, but actually we haven't, because we haven't really connected in the right way. So I definitely add that into the equation. But I think fundamentally it's about setting the right, I call it the conversational culture. So if we've got the right conversational culture, we can practically talk about anything to anyone. And as well as being safe, I would add into that, how have you built trust in each other? That's not just in the conversation that we're having now, but that's in all of the conversations we've previously had. Where is that level of trust? And how far has it got to? And then it's about really relating to people, human to human, which again, it sounds so sort of trite to say human to human. Of course we are. But I think people have needed to be reminded of that. We've become quite transactional in our communications, I think, over the last 18 months in particular. And, where it's been harder to just bump into people, have more random conversations, they feel a little bit more contrived. We've got to work out a way, and I do think it's possible, to kind of relate to people on a deeper level than just the transactional stuff, because that's what people crave. And that's where they do their best work, apart from anything, and also where their well-being is kind of looked after.
And just picking up on that, almost the last 18 months, this remote working, this hybrid working, and it's probably going to continue in some shape or form. And I think there's some real benefits to that. And in terms of flexible working, how do we, you talk about that being relating to people and that sort of that human connection, which I agree with you, meeting somebody in person, and I've done a lot more recently, a lot more in-person networking and meetings. You have that little chit chat stuff that, you know, that's good. You know, your weekend, talk about what's on TV, just that stuff that builds relationships, builds trust. And often we go into these meetings online because we've got half an hour and we're going to talk about this, and that's all we focus on, which is, and it does become a little bit transactional in that sense. So what are your thoughts on how you're helping organizations to get a little bit more the human side in the context of hybrid stroke remote working?
It's an interesting one, because I think there's been all sorts of let's face it, experiments around this over the last months, and people building in time at the beginning, at the end of meetings to do that kind of human connection. And my personal view is actually that doesn't really necessarily work very well, because it feels a bit contrived. It feels a bit like we're just doing that bit now. It feels like an add-on, really, which is not helpful. So I think it's all about setting the right tone for the content of the meeting. So rather than us being transactional, let's make more connection throughout the meeting. Let's not think we've got to add it on to the beginning or the end. And it is about the relationships that we build. Gosh, can you hear that? I'm really sorry.
I can.
Are we able to pause?
We can carry on. I can pull this out of the podcast. Don't worry about that. So
let me pause and just ask them to stop banging for another 10 minutes.
I can't stop the broadcast, but
okay, right. 2 seconds. Glenn, can you tell them to not bang? I think it's interrupting the podcast. Just give me 10 more minutes before they start banging. Sorry about that. Oh dear. Hopefully you can take that out.
I'll edit that out. That's fine. But people will have fun watching this live, and that's the good thing.
Sorry about that, folks. The joys of working from a home office.
Exactly. So you were just talking about the remote working and making it more part of the whole thing, as opposed to tagging on front and end type of thing.
Yes, because otherwise it doesn't feel natural, does it? It doesn't feel authentic. It doesn't feel you really care about me as an individual and as a human being. It just feels like you're going through the motions and kind of playing at it, really. So I think what we've got to do is we've got to get to the point where we're comfortable being expressive in everything that we're doing, even when it's transactional. And that means connecting on a human level. It's not that difficult, but it does require a level of emotional intelligence that means that we need to focus on that stuff. We need to focus on emotional intelligence and build it where perhaps we haven't really necessarily thought about that in the past.
Yeah, interesting. I remember speaking to a CEO earlier in the year, and he created almost an open forum, sort of a Zoom meeting that people could just literally jump in and chat. And so I think he opened it, I can't remember specifically, a number of hours a day. He just had it open in the background. So then if people come in, you can see people pop in and go, I just want to have a chat, just like walk into his office.
Yeah, wow.
And it created an openness, and he just carry on working and other stuff. And if he was busy, he just said, look, I'm on a call, I won't let you in, and we want to have a conversation. And then obviously other people popped in, and it, to me, it just created a little bit more the normality of an office sort of environment where you just pop into the office. And I thought that was quite interesting, actually.
I'd be really interested to know whether that continued in the long term. Because although it sounds like a good idea, unless people genuinely feel that offer is there on an ongoing basis, I think over time it becomes a little bit of a kind of, oh, well, we did that, but I don't want to now interrupt them and what have you. And I think a similar thing happened when I was starting a training course for clients online. They would say, we're going to open the room 15 minutes early so people can get that replication of arriving for a coffee and a biscuit and the chit chat around the room. It lasted for 1 or 2 sessions, but then after that, everyone just turns up a minute to start time because they're busy back to back Zooming. So I think I better ask for an excuse of my cynicism on that. But
yes, no, I get that, and it's interesting because it goes back to you mentioned about culture and talk about how do we take the savvy conversations. You might be a leader that actually does that, and that's brilliant, but how do we then take that into the organization that becomes a cultural way of working, so everybody's having these savvy conversations, and therefore it becomes the norm, and therefore it's the real. So how do we create the culture? Because I think that's a probably more difficult but a more impactful way to impact an organization.
I think that's right, and we can come up with all huge, greatly complex strategies to do this, but actually I really am a firm believer in coming back to the basics and saying actually it's the conversations we have day to day that are what builds the culture. And it doesn't really matter what you say your values are, what you say the culture is. It's the conversations that are those, I call them the smallish units of change. And they are what sits at the heart of the culture. So if you've got a leader who is saying, I want to have an open door policy, and you can come and talk to me about whatever you want, but their behavior doesn't match that, and they say, oh, but not now, I didn't mean now, I'm busy with back-to-back meetings, then that's not going to create the culture that we want. So it's a good reminder to think that it is the day-to-day conversations that we have that make the difference. And even when those conversations are tricky, difficult ones, actually that's even more of an opportunity to set the culture in the right way. Because if as a leader I have a difficult conversation with you, but I have it in a way that feels safe and you trust me, you trust my intent, we relate to each other on a human level, and I can level with you and tell you that what the truthful thing is that we need to be talking about, then actually you're going to far more respect me as a leader than if I'm just sort of playing at being nice or following some kind of set of values that's just written on the wall.
Yeah, and it's interesting you touched on that whole piece of role modeling, and role modeling is probably the most powerful ways to impact a culture and an organization, because I think people observe, well, probably subconsciously observe a lot more than they realize in a situation, and will pick up values, will pick up beliefs and all that sort of stuff when you engage in a conversation or observing somebody, how you're interacting with somebody. When you see somebody having a really positive conversation and think, oh, that's that, and they're doing positive, and they're doing it with them, and they see that, and it really helps build that culture, isn't it? So it does all start with leadership, and it's leading the way and stepping out there. Other thing you've mentioned a number of times is safe. Keep word, use safe. And so I presume you're thinking like psychological safety in that context, which if you're going to have those savvy conversations, that is probably an absolutely imperative, really, to create an environment where people feel safe. So how are you creating sort of within organizations sort of psychological safety?
I really do think it is key, and the way I work with individuals and teams on this is to encourage them to be open with each other, to spend some time with one another, and even if that is online, but to get to know each other as humans, because if we get to know each other as individuals, it already feels safer. It feels we do then pick up on each other's intentions. I get to feel and to see how you are towards me, and so I can trust you more. So it is about spending that time, putting that time in, having building the relationship, so that when you have to have a conversation that's a bit more tricky, you've actually got a lot of credits in the bank to be able to draw on. So we're not starting from a base level. We've actually already got that trust between us. So I know if you want to raise something with me that I might be embarrassed about, or I might be upset about, I know that you're not sharing that with me because you're trying to harm me in some way. You're saying it because you're trying to support and help me. And for me, that's where the psychological safety is so very important. And of course, it works the other way around. That I would really encourage leaders to really, like you said, role model by saying, if I don't do this, if you don't see me doing this, you call me out on it. I want you to call me out on it. I want you to obviously do it respectfully and do it in the way that is the right way. But yes, I don't want you to go away and think, oh, did they mean this? Did they mean that? What's going on? I want you to come and call me out on it, and let's clarify, and let's make sure that we do keep that level of psychological safety strong.
It's interesting because psychological safety is stemmed from it's relational, isn't it? It's that openness, it's that transparency. I often say to leaders, almost telling your people that you work with that it's to create a sense of place where it's okay to fail, it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay, as in, and we genuinely and own up to your own mistakes quite openly as well, because it creates an environment. Okay, he made a mistake on that, or obviously I'm not talking about focus on mistakes. Talk about but then using mistakes and failures as opportunities to learn. And obviously that's the best way to obviously embrace that. So just going forward now, thinking forward, what are your thoughts on what organizations need to think about over these next sort of months as people go back to the office or hybrid, or just start doing more in-person stuff, and they've probably not had conversations for a long time properly, if you know what I mean. So what thoughts and would you think about over these next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I think I'd come back to trying to get this balance between having the right conversation in the right way at the right time, because and particularly the right time, which gets neglected actually a lot of the time. So because we're in this rush to move on, to get everyone, but some people rushing to get people back into the office, or not, as the case may be, what's the right time for certain conversations to happen? And I think for me, what's happened over the last sort of 18 months is that some important conversations have been put off because it hasn't felt like it's the right time. And that in some cases that would be absolutely right. But in other cases, it's a bit of an excuse not to have the conversations that we needed to have. So it's to really, I guess, for leaders in particular, to ask themselves, what are the conversations I should be having right now? What are the things that are going to make the most difference to the organisation and my team to help them thrive in now a slightly new way of working, particularly if we're embracing hybrid or still remote working. So yeah, I would definitely say it's about thinking about when are the right conversations and which conversations are they.
Brilliant. I think that's really valuable to actually pause a little bit, think about those conversations, and almost think those conversations are going to make an absolute impact. And if you think in that way, then you'll think quite big about them and quite put a lot of time and energy into them, which is really important. I've loved our conversation today. So Sarah, really appreciate your openness, appreciate your advice. Please let people know how they can get hold of this book. This is your book. Thank you for that. And also how they can connect with you as well.
Lovely, thank you. And thanks very much for having me on today. So people can get the book at Amazon. If you just search for Savvy Conversations, it should come up there. I'm on Twitter as Sarah, Savvy Sarah, Instagram Savvy Sarah, and the website is savvyconversations.co.uk.
Brilliant. And I will just say to some of those we've not answered any comments, because I can't do two things at once. We've had Tracy, Shika, Kate, I'll see comments, which are good to see you three. And thank you for tuning in. And we'll come to reply to you soon when we go off air. But yeah, thank you for today, Sarah. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.